Hello, and welcome to the Project Good podcast. I'm your host, Anne Marie Hilton. Project Good is a social impact podcast interviewing experts and advocates about the pressing problems that we face globally and hearing how they suggest we move forward in the future. The Project Good podcast is brought to you by Project Good Work. The goal of this podcast is to inspire people and organizations to develop a mindset that can move others to positive action regarding the complex social issues facing people and the planet. For April, we're focusing on the topic of race and childhood. Unfortunate events during the past months have launched a movement of hope against racial injustice in different parts of the world. The call for change is important, and the existing climate of racial tensions and protests may be alarming, confusing, and stressful for our youth. Research shows racial justice can affect interpersonal relationships, education, economic status, and institutions of law, having significant effects on the physical and mental health of children of all races. Along with social and economic factors, discrimination plays a major role in health disparities, often leading to low birth rate, chronic disease, and mental health challenges in minority children, teens, and young adults. The American Academy of Pediatrics describes racism as not only a deeply rooted historical construct that has expanded into health, education, and legal policies of today, but also a socially transmitted disease passed down through generations. Today, I have the pleasure of interviewing Dr. Camille Hernandez-Ramdor, who is an associate professor at the Department of Sociology and an academic coordinator of Caribbean Studies at Ryerson University. Her areas of expertise are Caribbean studies, Caribbean tourism, transnationalism, second generation, African American traditional religions in the Caribbean, racism in Canada. She's also the writer, director, producer of Posting for Peace, a short documentary on youth, social media, and violence in Trinidad. She's the author of the ebook Introduction to the Caribbean: Diversity, Challenges, Resiliency, and Higher Education and the International Student Experience, which appears in the publication International Encounters. Let's get into the interview. Racism is rooted in different aspects and systems of life, which can influence the opportunities afforded to different populations. These influences have a great impact on children since they are innocent bystanders of what happens to their adult parents and families. Today, I will be discussing the role race plays in childhood with Dr. Camille Hernandez-Ramdor, an associate professor of the Department of Sociology and academic coordinator of Caribbean Studies at Ryerson University. Her focus on Caribbean studies allows her the insider's view into the complexities of race, since most of the Caribbean population is of a mixed background. Her research interests include Caribbean cultures, identities, Afro-Caribbean religions, second-generation identities, and racism in Caribbean peoples in Canada. Welcome, Dr. Hernandez-Ramdor.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So, before we get into the questions, what inspired you to focus on Caribbean studies?
My background, I probably would not have ever gone to university had it not been for an acquaintance of mine who told me that there was such a thing as Caribbean studies. And that is what hooked me. That's when I said, oh, maybe I can go to university. And once I actually did enroll and started doing my undergraduate in specializing in Caribbean studies, that was it. I was hooked. I loved it. I was in love with the material. It was really important to me that I could learn about myself and my history. It had been challenging for me growing up as a mixed race Caribbean Canadian person. Growing up in Canada, it was difficult, and this was so inspiring to me. It was so important to me for me to be able to actually go to school and learn about myself for the first time.
Wow. That is definitely that's different than what I would have thought, especially when somebody goes all the way to become a professor. So that is so you really have a true passion for what you do, and then I guess a direct understanding, which is perfect for our discussion today. And being of Caribbean background myself, and coming from a family that is very, very, very mixed, I'll say, even myself, I understand the role that just within my own family, I guess, even how, I guess you would say, I guess we'll call it, I'm not a biologist, but I guess how races end up physically expressed, meaning how you look from the outside, um, play a role even in how my own family, and I know from knowing other families from the Caribbean, play the role of how people are perceived within the family and society. And so I know that then that just because it plays out in families definitely has to be playing out in society as well. So hence why I thought this topic would be extremely important.
So I was saying that
Mhm.
actually has really little to do with race. I mean, the amount of genetic material that determines our skin color and our hair texture and these kind of things is so minute. And yet, in certain times in history and in certain societies, we've blown this thing up into, such an important issue, the difference in how we look as people, right? So I think that's the first thing that I guess I want to say around race, is that it's not so much the fact that we do look different and we have different eye shapes and eye colors and hair textures and so on. It's that the value that was placed on that in particular points in time, in particular historical circumstances, for particular reasons, is the only reason that we as human beings pay attention to that. So you can have prejudice and discrimination occurring in societies where everybody looks the same. You're going to use something else. You're going to use religion. You're going to use the way that you talk. You're going to use something else. And then, of course, it's very simple to do that now in societies where people actually don't look the same based on skin color, for example. And that's another way to discriminate. So, it doesn't, I guess what I want to say is we could easily get over this if we wanted to. But
Yeah.
what we're talking about is, an over 500-year history, at least in this part of the world, that came out of European colonialism that we still have not resolved. We have not gotten past that. And that's why we're still stuck here in this idea that somehow the way these particular ways that we look different, right? For example, we don't spend a whole lot of time worrying about eye color,
Right.
but we spend a
This is
whole
true.
hell of a lot of time. Yeah, like we, I forget what the woman's name is, but there's a famous woman, who always does this exercise. All the blue-eyed people over here, all the brown-eyed, people over here, and she's trying to point out, how we can make these little things important. So because we have this particular history that's based in the history of the transatlantic slave trade, of African slavery, of indigenous genocide, all of these things that were based in European colonialism, where people who were white-skinned, quote unquote, white-skinned, we're dealing with people who were darker skinned. And so we developed, or, we as human beings developed this particular idea about race. It could have been something else, right? And in the same way that this was developed is the same way that this could be dismantled.
Yes. Now, this leads me, I was going to ask another question first, but because because you brought up something important, that race is such a social construct. I guess from your own perspective, I don't know if this is necessarily a question that you can answer directly, but from your observation, because you are working with young people, and have you seen, I guess, I know you're working with university students, but even maybe children you've noticed, when they first start noticing, I guess, these differences? Is it something that I guess you think they notice right away or with time?
I think it's with time. I'm not sure of the exact age, but somehow it seems to me to be around 4 or 5, and usually that's the time that a child goes off to school. So prior to that, you find that usually children, that's the last thing that it doesn't occur to them. that people look different. They don't really comment on it. They don't notice it. And then something happens. So, I'm not entirely sure if that's maybe when they go off and they start mixing with other kids outside of the family circle, whether like daycare or kindergarten or whatever. But there comes a certain age when this difference, and I think this is also true for gender, right? That children start to notice, oh, you're different than me. You're different from me because of this or that, or, and then prior to that, there's just kind of age of innocence where, difference doesn't exist. And then suddenly it does. And then maybe, or maybe not that's somehow important to that child. And then, of course, that's when we can kind of start to see the socialization part. Like, what was this child taught something in their home of origin about race? Is the teacher doing something? Are they intervening here? Are they going to say something if the child, or children are discussing race in a particular way, or they're using race as a way to maybe hurt another child? So all of those things sort of come into play. But it does definitely happen at a certain age and not prior to.
Right. And then I guess one of the big things is that people probably ask, and I will say people that sometimes want to take, I guess, the colorblind side of things. I guess, how much does a child's race, would you say, have an impact on their future?
Well, it depends what their race is, right?
Well, yes, I guess that is, I guess, the answer within itself, in a way, is that, guess, is it just like people that it has an impact, just as we are on a color spectrum on the planet, that the impact has that, I guess, is the impact the same as the color spectrum?
Okay, I'm not sure what the okay.
That's meaning if you were if you can be the whitest white to the darkest dark, do you have does that play out as the lighter that you are, the easier or harder your life is? The darker you are, the easier or harder your life is. Does it?
That's only dependent on if you're in a white supremacist society, and if you're operating in a society in which there was European colonialism, or if you're in a society where the impact of, for example, American imperialism through culture, through television and cinema and internet and advertising has that kind of an impact, right? Again, like, it's not the race that's inherently the issue. It's racism. It's the values that are placed on appearance that's completely determined by the society that child's growing up in, right? So the child could grow up in a society where dark skin is highly valued. It's considered beautiful. It's considered gorgeous. So that's a non-issue then, right? So that's why I'm saying it's completely context specific, right? Where is this child growing up? What are the ideas around race? What are the values placed on dark skin, light skin, those kinds of things? And also, is this child being supported? Are they in a supportive system so that they can counteract the kinds of messages that might be there in that society? All of these things have to be taken into consideration.
I guess then, if we are looking, because and I could be just because I am here in the U.S., and so we have I guess been put into kind of a bias mode of how we think. I guess. And even things that I read around the world, I almost think that racism plays out in almost every country to a degree, when it comes to maybe darker skinned individuals, just because we are now in a society, or I would say the information age. So I don't know. Yeah. I guess one of the things is not knowing, I guess, are there societies that that this is not being pushed upon, I guess.
Yeah, and I hear what you're saying, because we are in an age now where, particularly, okay, I'm just thinking of maybe remote areas of the world, okay,
Mm-hmm.
where, non-urban areas, rural areas, more isolated communities and so on, but you're going to find advertising is infiltrating, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're going to find television is infiltrating. So yeah, I'd say that these kinds of messages that predominantly have come out of the United States for the past, I don't know, since like the 1930s, maybe. So we're almost in almost 100 years now, right? Of these
Mm-hmm.
messages that have been spread around the globe about what's considered beautiful, what's considered valuable, what's considered bad, what's considered good in terms of people's appearance. Yes, those messages have been, bombarding the planet for some time. But the degree to which people actually take on those ideas and sorry, my brain is stopped freezing. And take them to heart, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is different around the globe. So, for example, I'm thinking of a place like India, which is a huge, very diverse place, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
We know that there's ideas there about dark skin and light skin. We know that there are people there who are totally into bleaching, bleaching
Mm-hmm.
their skin. We know
Yes.
that Bollywood only shows a particular tone, of people's skin. Like, you have to be very, very light to be in a Bollywood film. And if you're at all dark, of course, you're going to be an evil character or a servant or
Yes.
something else, right?
Yes. Yes.
But we have to also consider that the British were there for over 100 years, a very, very long time, perpetuating those kinds of ideas. And some people would even argue, even before that, there were things going on between the Aryans and the Dravidians in India, and the Aryans were lighter skinned and they came from the north, and the Dravidians were dark and they were from, so some of these ideas about dark skin and light skin have been embedded in societies for centuries. Right. So
Mm-hmm.
that is something, that's going to be very difficult to dismantle. At the same time, we can look at societies where maybe there was a lot less infiltration of American imperialism. Maybe colonialism was not, didn't leave its mark to the same kind of extent. And that's why I'm saying, I don't want to say that the entire, I guess maybe that's my aspiration, is that the entire planet has not been consumed by white supremacy. I would like to think that there's places where people can still say, look at this beautiful child, how gorgeous and dark their skin is, or, look at the shape of their eyes. Isn't that fantastic that this child was born with, not round eyes, or whatever the case may be, or that, look at this lovely, tightly curled hair. That might not be the stories that we're hearing, but I believe that there are still societies where people have been able to hold on to some kind of semblance of pride in non-European appearance.
Yes. The only one,
and that might be the minority, for sure. But
yes, as you were speaking, actually, the only one that came off the top of my head that maybe has not been, and I'm not a history expert, but I believe Ethiopia is the only one in Africa that wasn't colonialized. So
briefly, I mean, the Italians tried really hard, and I think there was a moment there that they, but yes, they always say that Ethiopia was the one place that held out in Africa. And for sure. And that's what I'm saying. I think it's important that we do seek out those very specific histories where people resisted, and they resisted European domination, and they resisted all these kinds of ideas about their own, that they were not valuable, that there were places in the world, and there are places in the world where people have something to turn back to. They don't just have this distortion that came out of colonialism, hundreds of years of colonialism. I think it's different, and I know less about this, so I don't really want to talk too much about that side of the world, right? Like Africa and Asia, because that's not my expertise. What I understand a lot better is the Western Hemisphere and what happened to us in this part of the world because of that European domination, and how embedded that is in the societies that we live in today, like the United States, like Canada, like Caribbean societies, Latin American, it's messed up. Like
Yes.
yeah, like it's really, and like I said, I'm much more familiar with that history. So that is very clear. Okay.
Mhm.
But, maybe that's something that, I would like to research more. But I think there's parts of the world on the other side of the world where maybe European colonialism was not able to totally dominate and infiltrate in the way that it was in this part of the world.
Yes. So in all of this, all these, the experience, especially on in the Western Hemisphere, and the children that grow up on this side, how do you think that racism is affecting these children's development?
And I think you said it in the introduction. Racism, the way I describe racism to my students is it affects you from not just the cradle to the grave. It literally affects you from the womb to the grave, right? Because racism can affect the prenatal care that your mother gets. So think about that, right? Before you've even arrived on the planet, the prenatal care or lack thereof that your mother gets, the way that she's treated when she's pregnant, the kind of birth experience she has, it starts there, right?
Yes.
And then we take it into, infancy, and what kind of experiences did you have as an infant, as a child, when you go to school, as you get older, and then your parents, if your parents are racialized, what kind of experiences of racism are they having? What's going on there? We know that there's links between racism and poverty. And once we start talking about poverty, we know we have to talk about health. We have to talk about stress. We have to talk about disease. We have to talk about crime, because people who are poor tend to live in more dangerous neighborhoods. They tend to be surveilled more by the police. They have more interactions with the justice system, and we can just go on and on from there. So if we look at a person's entire lifespan, which racism can also shorten, it's enormous. It is absolutely enormous. And I think that's sometimes people, when they hear racism, they're like, oh, name calling, or maybe a physical attack, or, you didn't get that job or something like that. But it's not just that, it's compounded. It's compounded. And then it's the everyday microaggressions. It's just walking through the world. Like, you're in the United States. I don't have to tell you, right?
Yes,
Breathing while black, walking while black, sleeping while black, driving while black, living while black
Yes.
is like that affects your life chances. Period. Period. Just being black, breathing and standing while black that's all you have to do. You just have to be black, and it's like lessens your life chances. What the hell?
Yes.
I'm really interested. I'm a bit of a TikTok fiend, right? Kind of getting into TikTok a lot. I really do like it because it's just such a huge platform. But I'm really fascinated by there's this whole stream of TikToks now of Black Americans who are like, get me the hell out of here. And, I'm living in Mexico. I'm living in the Netherlands. I'm in New Zealand. I'm in Black Americans who are exiles. And they do these TikToks saying, it's great. You guys need to get out of there. I can just breathe. I walked down the street, and the other day a police car was driving behind me, and I didn't have to panic. I knew they weren't coming for me. It was very telling, very telling. So
So in this, I guess one of the big things, and I'm of course not in tune so much with Canadian TV, but here in the U.S. we've one of the hot topics has been critical race theory.
Oh my goodness! I don't know where they got. Why did these people find out about that they had to come after it with pitchforks? I'm just like, what? I don't understand.
Yes, critical race theory has become like a hot topic, evil word. And
It's the new communism. That's what I call it.
the new
The way Americans used to like freak out about communism, like the commies, the commies are coming, and the commies, and that's now the critical race people, It's because I mean, who cares about communism now, right? It's the Ruskies and like, no, who cares? So it's critical race people. It's incredible. It's absolutely mind blowing to me that this has become, the great evil that has to be stopped.
Yes. And once one of the things when you were talking and it's just, I guess, because what do they say, that you become numb once you are when you're so used to a situation, is that, yes, you're right. When the minute that I think most people think about racism, they think about like name calling or or being made fun of or something like that. But racism is much deeper than people realize, I think. And so I think that is the problem, is that most people don't realize how deep it really is. Because now when I think about it, and I think about when people I talk to sometimes get irritated about racism, they almost think of it like it's kind of like the school bully on the playground.
Yeah.
And so, if you are the unfortunate victim of the school bully, right? All your friends tell you, or if you have friends, because if you're too bullied, you sometimes don't have friends.
Right.
But if you do have friends, they tell you you should just stand up or just don't even pay attention to it anymore.
Yep. Sure.
And so I think that's how people see racism. Like, they're tired because they're just like, okay, so you're being bullied, just ignore it or tell the bullies to stop.
Right. Just get over it.
Right.
Over it.
Right. Because that's what you would do if somebody was like a bully and stealing your lunch money.
Right. Or go tell the teacher, and that's assuming that the teacher cares.
Right.
The teacher has the power to do anything, right?
Right. But this is, but racism is much deeper, because it literally is the, it knits the way our society is put together. It's
absolutely.
And I think right now in the world, because of everything that we have went through, all these traumas, that's what I'm calling all the things that are happening during this pandemic. We have so many traumas, even like I personally, I only tune in every once in a while anymore, because you can only take so much bad news, I believe.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
That this, this now, I guess, it makes sense that we are now having this racial eruption. I guess it just adds to, I guess, the continuous trauma of this experience, of this ongoing pandemic. And so I guess that is leading to my next question. I know I a little bit answered it, but I wanted to get your perspective of, since the world is becoming more of a melting pot because we are literally a touch of the finger away from each other. Why do you think the rise in the focus? Why is there a rise in the focus of race?
Yeah, that's really interesting, that you raise that, because I've been thinking of the same thing myself. So I think the first thing that I want to say about that is what I'm kind of seeing on a global level, and maybe on a history level, like in terms of the history, is that these things are dying, right? Like, I've watched with great fascination the absolute intense divisions around these vaccinations, right? And the way that vaccinated and unvaccinated have become the new determinants of, what side are you on and what do you represent? And to me, that could have only happened because things like race and gender and ability are all kind of dissolving. It's like we've come to a point where there's been pushback finally from people, like from 2020 with George Floyd and Black Lives Matter and all of these things exploding and the statues coming down that have been there for hundreds of years and so on. To me, I think people who were really invested in that, in keeping people apart on the basis of race, panicked. This is awful, right? It's like, oh my God, we can't use race anymore to divide people. And then, of course, for some time we've had transgender people speaking out and saying, we have to dismantle gender, and now we've got pronouns and everybody's using pronouns, and it's becoming more normalized. And then we've got same-sex, couples and families and whatever. This has all been going on for some time as we sort of push more towards unity, right? Like, let's stop dividing each other on the basis of race, on the basis of gender, on the basis of sexuality, whatever. And now it's like, what's left, right? So in this very particular moment, it was like, well, let's divide ourselves between vaccinated and unvaccinated, because we kind of, what else can we do? And it's the thing that I was saying at the beginning of the podcast. In societies where everybody looks alike, you have to find something else to divide people, right? So if we're in this, if we were moving, or we were almost moving towards maybe a post-racial world, I'm not saying we're anywhere close to it, but we were kind of moving in that direction. And then it was like, you know what? We have to find something else to divide people. So I don't know if I'm answering the question specifically, but I want to say we're in this kind of moment now. And every time we could take, like, for example, feminism in the 1970s, when women, particularly it was white middle-class women, let's be honest. But I mean, it went globally, and, internationally, women from around the world were kind of saying enough, like, we need to have laws on the books that represent us and so on. A lot of things happened in that era for women that had not been happening historically. And then, of course, there was backlash, right? So every time historically, when we're moving somewhere, maybe progressively towards greater unity, towards greater harmony, there's always the backlash that comes. So the way that I see it right now is it's going to dismantle. It will. But right now we're in the backlash moment. And the backlash comes from those people who are panicked by this. Right? They're panicked by it. They cannot imagine a world where you can no longer divide people on the basis of race. There's a lot of people who cannot imagine a world where white people are not in charge. Okay, just like with the feminist movement, there were a lot of men who were freaked out, and some women who were freaked out that men would not be in charge. That women were going to be leading countries, that women were going to be leading corporations, that women were going to not be in the home, that women were going to control their wombs, right? So we're in that historical moment right now where Black and brown people and beige and, indigenous people, like all over the globe, are like, we're not taking this anymore. Like, no. So in the middle of all of this, there is the reality that there's more and more and more multiracial people being born all the time. And that's why I'm saying eventually. However, as a person who studies this phenomenon, right, not the birth rate of multiracial people, but the way that multiracial people identify, what I found a couple of things that I find really, really interesting. And the first is the fact that the same kind of crap that a person like myself, and I'm now in my 50s, the same kind of crap that I was going through in the 80s and 90s as a young multiracial person in Canada, the same kinds of issues that I was dealing with, which were really of not feeling I could belong anywhere. I didn't have a tribe, okay? I didn't have a place where I felt that I belonged. I'm still seeing this with young people today. So that's something that I have to, perplexes me. I'm like, why are we still here? Why is this young generation of people still in this quandary? So that's the first thing. The second thing is not everybody who's multiracial identifies as being racialized, right? That was an eye-opener for me. I'll give you the story. So I get interviewed by students a lot. We have a journalism school in the university I teach in. And I had a young man contact me and said, I want to interview you about being mixed race. I'm mixed race, blah, blah. I said, okay, cool. I've done this a million times, And I was expecting a certain kind of interview. And we hadn't seen each other. He didn't come to my office. We did it over the phone. And about midway through the interview, he just asked this question. He said, so why is it that you think that so many people who are mixed race identify as white? Yeah, and I just went, what? And I said, I'm sorry, have you seen what I look like? And he said, I can't remember if he had or not. And then I was so blown away by the question, right? Because my experience of people who are mixed race is that they tend to identify as racialized. They experience racism, right? So it turns out he was a person who was Asian, like I'm not sure if it was Chinese or what, and white. And so he was saying that whether himself or people like him were really trying to be white, right? And I thought, okay, this is something new for me, right? I guess maybe not entirely new, but I was a little surprised to hear that. So I thought, okay, and this is why we can't have the mixed race group, right? Like the same way you say, well, here's the Black people and here's the Indigenous, and you can't, because we all look different. We all come from different backgrounds. Some of us can only be racialized. There's no, is that person or aren't they? And, some of us are kind of nondescript, and then there's some who could pass for white and choose to, right?
Yes.
So even though we can say, okay, so that my point being, so more and more multiracial people are being born, but that doesn't mean that they're, we're all alike. Like it's going to be a group that is a group, because it's not a group, right?
Right.
Not to say that the other groups are groups either, because none of these, I'm always harping on about there's no, what is Black? I mean, what is this category Black? Black is so elastic as a category. When you talk about the Black community, who are you talking about? It's like,
Yes. No, you say something that that hits me on even a personal level. Even though I myself am, my background, I'm Jamaican and I'm Black, but my daughter is mixed. My husband is German Czechoslovakian, and when she's born, she looks white. Like everybody doesn't think that she's my daughter, right?
Oh, yeah.
And she can easily, because I was like, how come this girl doesn't tan?
Wow.
Yes, like everybody. Yes, it's amazing. Like but of course, in my background, my grandfather. Is only half Black, and then his father was like the super white redhead Irish man.
Right.
So it all is about the gamble of the genes of how you turn out.
Yeah, sure. Exactly.
And so so she turned out looking like a very white Irish girl.
Wow.
and so and so I wonder, she's still little and doesn't probably understand any of this stuff quite yet, but I wonder in the future if she does just decide to identify with white because that's what she looks like. I've heard this, actually. I heard this what you were saying as something I was reading about in America about mixed white and Hispanic youth, because if they looked more white, they would just identify themselves as white, because it just, I would assume people are doing this because it's easier in the society.
Well, and I think we have to look at it. We have to be careful too, because we have to remember that it's not just how we ourselves want to identify; it's how we're identified, right? So, I mean, if everywhere, like let's say your daughter growing up, if everywhere she goes, people just treat her as white, assume she's white, maybe even get upset if she goes, actually, I'm half Black, or whatever, however she wants to define herself, or I'm a quarter Black or whatever. And people will say, well, you don't look it, like people are really good at putting you in your place when it comes to race. They don't like when you are trying to question their perception of you. I'm just saying this, as a person who's experienced this my entire life, right? That people are constantly trying to tell me who I am, what I should be, how I should identify. And, it's for a child, especially, that's really challenging, right? It takes a lot of strength and, parents as well, I think, who would support the child in that. But it's really difficult. Like sometimes I just, a kind of crazy analogy I use for my students is like, you can call yourself a purple, pink spotted hippopotamus all day long, but if people don't see you as a purple, pink spotted hippopotamus, then it doesn't really matter, right? How you want to define yourself. And that's the thing about race. Race is totally superficial. It's totally based on people's perceptions, So people who are not clearly falling within these very specific racial categories, and there's tons of us, it's kind of an everyday battle. So you have to figure out, well, what do I really want to do about this? And I think a lot of it's just like you accept that people are going to think what they want to think, and society is going to think what they want to think, and you have to decide for yourself who you are.
That begs the question then, as for parents, should parents discuss race with children?
100%. But not race in a and it's like, well, because these are the genes. No, not that. About the importance that the societies we live in place on race. And frankly, when I'm saying the importance, and then poo-poo that and say, and it really doesn't matter a damn at the end of the day. What matters is your character. What matters is if you're a good person, right? So people are going to tell you, that you belong to this group or you belong to that group or whatever. But keep in mind that good people come in all shapes, sizes, and colors, and bad people come in all shapes, sizes, and colors. And I say this because I find sometimes, maybe not, I guess parents as well, but people in general who sometimes want to, join a racial tribe or just be really tribal with the racial thing. Okay. And that's so flawed because, there's an expression, people use in Trinidad, which is chain up, which means to get your head, so somebody can kind of brainwash you, right? It means you take chain up. It means like if someone's telling you belong to this tribe and you need to represent for this tribe and this is your people and you got to be loyal to your people and they're going to be loyal to you. That's the quickest way to just get scammed by somebody from your tribe, right? If you try to align yourself on the basis of race, good luck to you. Because you're so busy looking at the superficial and assuming that just because this person looks like you, they are down for you. No. Right. But I think we get caught up in that a lot in North America, especially. But in other parts of the world too, right? We really are like, no, you've got to be with your people who look like you, as if that means anything. Like at the end of, race is superficial. It doesn't mean anything. It does not tell me, for example, I can look at someone and say, well, they belong to X race. That doesn't tell me anything about them. What kind of person are you? What kind of morals do you have? What kind of values do you have? What kind of culture do you practice? What kind of language do you speak? What are your spiritual beliefs? How do you treat your children? Do you like dogs? Like nothing. Tells me nothing about you, except that you have this shade of skin, you have this texture of hair, you have these kinds of facial features.
Yes. And when, especially when people are talking about tribes and parents, and I feel there is a certain difference, I could be wrong, but about how white parents deal with race versus parents of other racial backgrounds when they are, I guess I'm going to make it a two-part question. So I guess when they are looking at race, maybe themselves, and then how they then deal with race, I guess for sharing, or I'll call it, I guess, parenting with their children.
Sorry. Can you say that again? Are you talking specifically about white parents now, or parents in general?
I'm talking about how white parents deal with race versus parents of other racial backgrounds when it comes to parenting.
Okay.
I guess, do you see, are there differences?
Yeah, sure.
Mm-hmm.
Sure. Because, I mean, the first thing is white people in general, unless they've specifically and consciously decided to do so, don't have to think about race. They don't have to think about it because it doesn't affect them because of white privilege, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you are living in a society that is a white supremacist society, you just have an automatic pass as a white person. By the virtue of having white skin and looking like you're of European descent, that gives you a kind of privilege, which means you don't have to think about things the way that racialized people have to think about them. Okay, because it doesn't affect you. In those examples that I gave of like from the womb to the grave,
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't happen to white people unless they're a white person who might be affected by some other kinds of marker of oppression, like poverty or disability or sexuality, something where they are experiencing some kind of marginalization despite the fact that they're white.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But if they're a white person who's able-bodied and they're heterosexual, and especially if they're male, they get so much privilege, unearned privilege and unrecognized privilege, because they're not even aware of the privilege that they have, right? And it's only when they start to listen to racialized people about how different their experiences are in the society, which is what has been happening a lot, right? I think like particularly 2020 and Black Lives Matter and all these, where a lot of white people were finally going, that's what it's like for you, or having to look at the horrific incidences, and it's hard to even call them incidences because there's been so many of them, of Black
Right.
people being killed by, police just for being Black. I mean, how could you be white and not sit there and think about that, right? But the truth is, these kinds of horrific instances have been going on since the beginning of colonialism, because that is what happened to Indigenous people, and Indigenous people are kind of erased in the United States. I mean, in Canada, there's a much bigger conversation and public discourse about indigeneity, about Indigenous people and what happened to them and what still happened, the fact that they're still there and the fact that we still have to deal with this. Like, this has to be addressed. But in the United States, that just seems to be kind of a disappeared conversation, right? So in other words, this whole thing about race and racism has been going on for a very long time. And even when 9/11 happened and Islamophobia and the attacks on who were perceived to be Arabs, because a lot of people weren't, I'm laughing, but it's not funny.
Right. No, I know what you mean.
Yeah, so we go through these cycles where certain groups are suddenly front and center and they're in the spotlight, and then they disappear and somebody else reappears. And I mean, what about Japanese that were rounded up and put into concentration camps during the World War II? Like, is this stuff being taught in schools? Are people having these conversations? Because sometimes I really wonder, because it's still going on. Like, we still have not overcome it. We still have not resolved it. And it's good, I think, that we're talking about it, but I just feel like we've just now opened the door. And as we were talking about just a little while ago, as you were saying, there's people who are really trying to close that door. Like, there's a backlash, and they're like, no, we're not gonna stop holding on to race as a way to divide people. But like I said, I think that when I was talking about tribes, I think what I was also getting at is that we ourselves as racialized people also participate in this, right? When we also say we're going to build tribes or groups based
Hmm.
on our experiences of racism. Okay,
Right.
like we're going to
Such as
bond.
like a Indigenous People Association, or a Black, or even maybe even
Yes.
Black Lives Matter, or something like that.
Sure,
Hmm.
sure. And
Hmm.
I mean, these are all necessary. Like, I'm not in any way saying, racialized folks shouldn't organize. And yes, there is a real thing called anti-Black racism that's specifically about the kinds of racism that Black people specifically have faced and continue to face. All of that's really important. I think the problem is we have to recognize that these are organizations or tribes or groups that are formed to combat racism. But in and of themselves, there is no inherent bond on the basis of race. And that's what troubles me, because then people start to talk about race as if it's an actual identity. Okay?
Hmm.
And that's what I was getting at. There's no, one thing I'll say to my students all the time, I'll say, there's no thing as Black culture, And they're like, yes, there is, Beyonce or something. And I'm like, that's not Black culture, right?
That's a
No,
celebrity.
seriously, like that,
That's a,
or
yeah,
Cardi B, or
celebrity. Yeah, yeah.
or Obama, or and it's like, no, like, first of all, let's break down this thing called Black.
Hmm.
And who can be Black and who can't. Okay, so right, people of Africa. Well, you do know there's people in Africa that you're right, they're not dark skinned. Like, okay. So we're talking
Hmm.
about people who have this particular look, Okay, fine. Do you really think that all the people who look this way in the world share the same culture? Do you really believe that? Because if you do, you're very uninformed, right?
Hmm.
So,
Yes. Hmm.
there are Black cultures if you want to go there, but even more specifically, I can't even begin to name. And this is the thing, when you do talk to people from the actual continent of Africa, or let's just take even West Africa, they'll be like, I'm not Black. What are you talking, I'm
Yeah.
Igbo, I'm Kuramanti,
Yes.
I'm Ashanti, they know
Uh-huh.
who they are. They know
Hmm.
who they are. It's not about their race or this thing called race. It's about ethnicity.
Hmm.
Okay. So here's what I'm saying. So when we come back to these damaged societies we have over here in the Western Hemisphere, we have been taught, and it's ingrained in us and in our parents and our grandparents, that we're supposed to identify on the basis of race. And it doesn't make any sense. We are being identified on the basis of race. We are being treated differently on the basis of race. But all of that comes out of colonialism.
Hmm.
And race is not a basis for identity.
One of the things that you brought up, and I think this is just important to highlight, because I think sometimes people don't understand the difference, is what is the difference between race and ethnicity?
Yeah. And the way that I do this in class, I say, can you tell somebody's ethnicity by looking at them? Most of the time, the students by now in the class will realize they better not say yes. Right? They're gonna like, okay, let me think about this one. But then we have to break it down and say, well, yeah, sometimes you can. Okay, well, so if I see a woman wearing a hijab, I'm gonna probably assume she's Muslim. Okay, so yes, fine. We're going to see somebody wearing a crucifix. Oh, you're probably Christian. A man wearing a yarmulke. Okay, you're probably Jewish. All right, fine. So we could say, some people, there's some markers in clothing or headgear or whatever that tells us, something you're wearing around your neck that tells us you belong to maybe a particular spiritual or religion or whatever. But outside of that, and nobody's opening their mouths, nobody's speaking, just on site, can you tell me that you will know for certain somebody's ethnicity by looking at them? No, you can't. What you're seeing is race. And race and ethnicity are not the same thing. Ethnicity is culture. Ethnicity is your beliefs. Ethnicity is the language that you speak, the kind of food that you eat, your traditions in your family. Sometimes race and ethnicity overlap, in some very specific circumstances, because the ethnic group that you belong to all happen to look exactly alike. So, but that's still not really race, because there could be other people who look like your ethnic group that aren't of your ethnic group. So really and truly, so ethnicity tells us a whole lot about people. Like, once I know what your ethnicity is, then then I have a better idea about who you are as a person, especially when it comes to things like beliefs and traditions and, that's kind of, to me, the basis of who you are as a human being. Race can't tell me any of that. So the people get it twisted. And that's like, when we hear things like Black culture, that's twisting it up, And I think, I think Americans are really good at that. I'm just going to say it. And the only reason I'm saying is because, and Canadians will just swallow it wholesale, right? America will be like, this is the way it is. And Americans are like, yep, facts,
Yes, that is true. One of the things I think is because, because a lot of people, I guess here's my Jamaican coming out out of me. A lot of people don't know where they come from.
That's it. That's it.
And so this is the way to say, this is how I can identify, because I really don't know where I come from, because a lot of the people, because I think especially here in the Western Hemisphere, one of the things, even, I'm an immigrant, and in coming to America, my parents were, scared. And, I spent the first few years, learning how to get rid of my accent. Right. Yeah. My parents sent me to school to get rid of it, because they were like, oh, we can't, oh, no. And so I think that's what happens here in the Western Hemisphere, because everything has been pushed to more of a, I guess you would say, a European, or it's beyond European, because even Europeans have still culture, a lean that we are all going to, go to this one, generalized culture. And so your culture needs to be pushed away in order to, I guess, have a way to survive. At least that's how my family looked at it, as like, okay, we've got to change some things so we can survive in changing where we're living. And so I think that's why from, in America, I think that's why a lot of people now, that's the only thing that they have to, I guess, cling on to, I would say.
Yeah, and I think part of the problem. Sorry, I just want to jump in there. I mean, I think if somebody says, "Oh, African American culture," then I'm like, okay, yeah, sure. Now I understand what you're saying, because African American, although that could be a racial category, I suppose, it tells me something about who you are. It tells me that, first of all, you live in the United States, your people are from the United States, and probably that means that, and not exclusively, because we know there's a whole lot of divisions going on right now around this, but it probably means that your ancestors were enslaved Africans on plantations in the American South. And then perhaps at some particular juncture post-slavery, they may have migrated north if you're living in the north, or they remained in the south if your people were still from the south, or whatever happened there. That's a very specific history. People should be proud of it. There's a whole lot of traditions that come out of that. That's great. But that is not what happens, because just as you were saying, you coming as a Jamaican child now have to assimilate, and you have to figure out pretty quick. And if you look, quote unquote, Black, then you have to now be African American. But that's not your cultural history. That wasn't your history. Your history was Jamaican history. And the reason I'm saying there's these divisions now is that there's greater and greater numbers of people from the African continent migrating to the United States. And then there's people who are the descendants of those enslaved people. And now they want to draw a line and say, hey, you people who are newly arrived Africans, you didn't go through what my people went through. So now, and I can't remember the term, but there's that term about, Black descended from slavery, as opposed to fresh off the boat African. Right?
Yes.
And I mean, yes, like having to make this distinction. And, I'm not mad at anybody for doing that, because I think that's exactly what I'm saying. If you just paint everybody with the same brush, say, we're all black. No, there's really important distinctions there. There are historical distinctions, there are cultural distinctions. I mean, to get really nitty and gritty with this, some of these people who might be migrating from Africa their ancestors may have sold your ancestors into slavery. That's real. So, let's talk about it, because I'm a fan of the show Insecure. I watched Insecure. But what I didn't like in that show was that I saw there was an erasure. Every character, every actor in that show, at least in the lead cast, were people who were like second generation African, right? At least one parent. So like they were Nigerian or I can't remember. I think it's Senegalese. But their characters were only portrayed as African Americans. And I thought, that's an erasure. Why did you do that? Why don't you portray who you really are as actors, right? Like, why are you trying to erase that particular ethnicity, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I found that interesting, because it made it, I think, more mainstream and acceptable, so that we could all just go, oh yeah, they're African Americans, just like the Huxtables or whatever, right? They're all just like, we know what that is, Good Times, the Jeffersons, like it's African Americans, but they're not. They're not. And that's when you start to erase that, then, that's problematic.
Right. No, and it's important. And I found, even in my own journey, is that I found, there is a difference. And then because, my parents didn't grow up here, they didn't understand some of the concepts other parents that were African American understood.
Yep.
And, and since they didn't understand those didn't get passed out to me. And then I was, although my outside, I look black, I didn't understand African American culture because I had to learn it, which is which is then perplexing for people when they see me here in America, that they say certain things and I didn't understand them.
Sure.
So yes, I really think that all plays a big part in something that needs to be explored and celebrated a lot in society. And speaking, I guess, of celebrations, and one of the things that's popular, at least here in America, for, I guess you would say, quote unquote, woke parents, is that they are concerned about introducing diversity into their children's lives. Do you think they should be, people should really try to go out of their way to introduce diversity? Or is that, I don't want to use the word insult, but is that is it not sincere?
Okay, you need to define what you mean by diversity specifically.
So when what happens with a lot of woke parents sometimes is that they're like, oh, my child who is white only has white friends. It's time they go out, and now I'm going to start sending them to a Chinese school so that they can start learning Chinese language, or I'm going to take them on the weekends over to the African American community so that they can get to know Black children. It sounds funny, but this is what the woke parents are trying to do.
So you're talking about woke white parents.
Yes, woke white parents.
Why? Okay. So,
yes. Yes. That is, it's something that actually is happening. And I, the other day, actually, I was having a talk with a parent, and they didn't want to send their child to the local school because they said it wasn't diverse enough. So they wanted to search around for a school that had more diversity, so that they were, really building their child, preparing them for the real world. So it is actually, I don't know if I want to say a trend, but I guess maybe it's a trend, or something that's been happening.
I think, it really depends if it's coming from a sincere place. And A sincere place to me would mean that you recognize that the world is diverse. You recognize that you're probably living in a bubble of white privilege, and you want to ensure that your kid doesn't grow up only knowing that white privilege, and that they should be interacting with people of different cultures and different races and so on, to understand that this is indeed the world, and in fact white people are a minority on this planet. So that might be a good experience for that kid, to be a minority for a change in the school that's heavily racialized, for example. But that's coming from a sincere place. And it also means that that parent would not feel threatened if their child loses that white privilege in a certain extent, because they are the minority, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's that. So I think that's coming from a good place. The parent who's doing it more like, let's take a tour of the ghetto on the weekend, so like Bobby can like see Black people in their native habitat or whatever, or let's go to Pasadena and or Olvera Street or whatever. I'm trying to think of LA, right? So we can rub shoulders with the Mexicans and go in an authentic cantina and whatever. That is not coming from the right place, obviously. That's more like, let's take an exotic tour, or it's like, let's go to the zoo and observe, the animals in their native habitat from the safety of our SUV, and then drive out of here, with our windows up and the doors locked. No. So, or even, I think, it becomes even more nefarious when we see people who are actually appropriating other people's cultures. And then calling it diversity. Like that's really not okay, because we see, privileged white people are doing this all the time. They do it with music, they do it with dances, they do it with food, they do it with religion and spirituality, and they appropriate. Of course, Indigenous culture has just been raped, to the hilt because white people's fascination with that. But it's any culture, right? So if it's also coming from a place like that, where it's all about I want my daughter to get her hair in boxer braids, because the Kardashians are doing it. I mean, and the Kardashians doing it is a problem. I mean, the Kardashians are a great example of that, right? Like that's not being diverse. That's just being a thief. So, and not, acknowledging where the things that you're doing are coming from. So again, I don't know if that answers the question. It's just, where's the reason behind it? What is the purpose for you wanting to do this? Is it coming from a place where that is truly about checking your privilege? Or is it coming from a place where you don't want to let go of any of that privilege and you just want to have an exotic experience, and not lose any of that privilege that you did nothing to earn, frankly?
Yes. And then I guess in this, I think one of the things that parents, I guess any parent, not just the ones that are, consider themselves socially conscious, but how do parents, I guess, from all races, confront their own racial bias?
Yeah, that's a good one, because everybody has it, right? Let's not pretend, right?
Right.
Everybody has it, right? So, and I think that's again, well, first of all, I think there we would have to talk about stereotypes. And I think probably the place in popular culture where this is most evident is comedy. It's still really acceptable for non-white comedians to make jokes about other races. It's, for some reason, that is still acceptable. But if a white person makes jokes about, well, I've seen some of them still do it and get away with it. But, comedy kind of, it's an arena where you're kind of allowed to say these really offensive things that, okay, it's comedy. But at the same time, a lot of what these comedians are saying, and I'm saying they could come, whether they're Mexican or they're African American or wherever they're coming from, what they're saying is coming from a true place. So this is the place where you'll see Black comedians making jokes about Chinese people and Persian comedians making jokes about Indians, and it's kind of and that's where you see that, oh yeah, people got real prejudices against other groups, and nobody's really calling other people on it. And I think at the end of the day, it comes back to a place, it's like a pecking order. Under colonialism, the white person, and even let's take the plantation, the white master was always at the top, and then it kind of went down by shade, and the lighter you were, the higher up this pyramid you were, and then it got darker and darker, and the darker you were, and the less the less you had access to any kind of power was how far down this pyramid you were. So if you were somewhere in the middle, you always had somebody to pick on. You were being picked on, but there was somebody below you that you could pick on. So we continue to do this, right? We continue to do this to each other and not recognize that who's really holding power at the end of the day, right? So if we're bickering amongst each other, let's say as people who are affected by racism, are we really looking at why all of us are still being oppressed by a power structure that none of us can seem to overcome? And in other words, why aren't we looking at our what we have in common as opposed to our differences? So I think that's the first thing. This is really directed at racialized parents, right? Is that if you're a racialized parent and you're still saying racist things about other groups, and I'm not including whites in this for a very particular reason, but I'm saying if you have racism against Chinese or Indians or whatever, you need to stop and look at where is that coming from? Where's that coming from? Because at the end of the day, we're all being screwed over in this racist system. So, and is it coming out of a particular stereotype? Can you really say that, whatever the negative stereotype that you particularly hold against a group is true for every single person from that group? No, that's impossible. So, check those ideas. But I think, and this is why I said, if it's a racialized parent and they have particular ideas about white people, that's coming out of a different place. That's not just that, well, white people are, whatever. It's coming out of a place that has to do with power and who has power. So I think it's important to acknowledge that as well, that there is something called white power in the society. And it's not that, I guess it's kind of like, it's not about I don't like white people because X, Y, Z. It's about, I don't like white supremacy because X, Y, Z. So it's not about people. It's about a system. Right. It's the same as, if someone is a woman or women who are upset about patriarchy, right, as a system of power, and someone will come along and say, you all hate men. And it's like, no, we don't hate men. We hate patriarchy. There's a difference. Right. So I think that's one way that you can teach your children. It's like, hate the power structure that's about inequality and oppression. Don't hate people who maybe are benefiting from that, but let's not make this personal. And then for white parents, the first thing that all white people need to do in regards to racism is recognize what white privilege is. The first thing, you have to understand that as a white person in these societies, you have so much privilege that you're not even aware of, right? And unless you can do that, then you can't really go any further than that. Anything you do is going to be superficial. You really have to understand how much power you have just on the basis of your white skin, right? That opens so many doors for you that you didn't even know, like, that are closed to other people, right? So, and so many things, and even a particular lifestyle that you might be able to live because your ancestors benefited from this. And again, you're not even aware. And you might assume that it's just this way for everybody. And then, of course, it's very easy to assume that people who don't have that level of privilege, well, they did something wrong. They were lazy, or they were stupid, they had too many kids, they are on drugs, right? It's their fault, but somehow you and your people did things right. No, that's not what happened here, right? And at the same time, I mean, that's not to say that every white person has the same level of privilege, right? Because as I said, some white people come from generations of poverty. You
Mm-hmm.
could be a white person who's living with a disability, and that totally changes your white privilege, like
Right.
hugely, you know? Yeah.
Yes. Thank you for bringing up those points, because I think that you answered the argument that happens a lot, that I see from white a lot of white people, is like, well, wait just a moment. So, thank you for answering those points. The I just have two more questions for you.
Mhm.
I wanted to touch on this topic. I'm going in a different direction on social media, just because it is. A big it's playing out big right now in society because of Facebook's change over to Meta, and the direction that they are possibly, or I won't even say possibly, the direction that they're going with their platform, and what that may mean for the world and how we interact. Of course, it's not fully in effect yet, but I
Yeah.
think if we start to examine and start to peel the layers, I think it is definitely taking us to a different level than we have experienced social media currently. And so, one of the things is because social media is a big factor around the world. I know that only because a lot of the projects that I work on, one of the biggest platforms that some of the poorest countries utilize is social media, because it is free. Um, and so I believe social media has a big effect on youth, just because we have seen, the unfortunate things that happen sometimes when kids are bullied and, can't handle it anymore. We've seen people, die, unfortunately. So I guess, how do you think that social media plays in defining race and self-identity? I know that you did a project or a documentary in the past, Posting for Peace, and I wanted to kind of get your personal thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think social media has the potential to be the great equalizer. I'm absolutely fascinated by the fact that the way in which social media can democratize access to messaging. And for something like identity, it's just a brilliant platform. But at the same time, you were just talking about Facebook and Meta and these, and that's based in the United States, and then TikTok, which is based in China, and these different platforms that are still, out of the hands, still controlled, by sort of world power. So we have to call China a world power now.
Mm-hmm.
And all the time we're hearing about people being banned from TikTok for whatever. So someone is still, deciding who gets access and who doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
I would love to see more and more platforms emerging. And I absolutely think this is going to happen from other parts of the world. Like, I want to see a platform get really big on the African continent, and the same thing in Latin America, and the same thing in the Caribbean, where we can have our own platforms that we control, right? And at the same time, we can be engaging in these other multi-billion, participant platforms. But when it comes to discussions around race, and that's why I'm such a fan of TikTok, because I guess my algorithms bring me these kinds of things, right? I'm seeing these amazing conversations going on. There's no other way these could have been taking place without a platform like TikTok. So for example, like some of the things we've been talking about today, I am seeing Black Americans being taken to task by Black skinned people around the world who are like, who the hell do you think you are? Like, I'm not Black. You don't know who you are. Let me tell you about race. Your perception of race is not global. It's not universal. This is how I see myself, and there's nothing wrong with it. This is how in my country we do things. Like, I'm listening to these conversations and I'm just blown away, because everybody gets to have a say. It's not
Mm-hmm.
like the Americans have a bigger TikTok platform, or no, there's somebody in, Uganda who made a TikTok, today, and like 2 seconds later, somebody from the Dominican Republic is going to respond to them. And they're all stitching this person in the United States who made a comment. And within minutes or seconds or days, 200 people have come for this American. And so the American voice is no longer the dominant voice.
Mm-hmm.
That's huge, because for generations, the American voice has been the dominant voice. And it's not like, okay, let's exchange the American voice for the Chinese voice. No. As long as you have access to social media and you have access to TikTok, it doesn't matter. And you can make a good TikTok and your response is, you don't have to have the right ring light or whatever. You just said your piece and people are like, yeah. And those conversations are priceless. And it makes people think. You can see the wheels turning. You can see people are like, hey, I never thought of that. I learned something today. But listen to this girl over here who's in Tanzania, and then they'll show you Tanzania and they'll talk about Tanzania and the history of it. And, everybody's getting schooled on TikTok. It's amazing. I love it. No, it's like, how else could that happen? I used to fantasize about having, international online classrooms where you could have the student in Tanzania and the person in Uruguay and the person in, Greenland or whatever. But that can't really work because we're all in different time zones.
Right? Yes.
We couldn't all literally sit in the classroom together and have these discussions, but we can have these discussions on TikTok. And although TikTok is full of a whole lot of crap, and we know that, right? A whole lot of twerking or whatever. There's this side of TikTok that is mind-blowing. It's mind-blowing and it's educational. And it's a lot of youth. And it's a lot of youth who are intelligent and they have intelligent things to say. And they're not afraid to say them, and they're not afraid to challenge others about their perceptions of the world and the people in it. And that's, like I said, to me, that's just fantastic.
I love the perspective that you've given, because I didn't even think that far into social media, how it is allowing everyone to have a different type of global conversation. And I guess in a way, or I don't even have to say in a way, but showcasing the truth of the real experience that people are, living in the areas that they are. And it's not just, what we, put people in, a stereotypical box. So people can actually see that, it's actually, it's different than what I thought it was. So
yeah, although I'm realizing now as I'm saying this, the one defining factor for all those people is that they were all speaking English. Right. So unfortunately, I'm not saying that doesn't happen on TikTok. And I think it does from time to time. There will be people who might use captioning, translation, to say what they have to say in English, because, of course, English becomes that universal language. But that's not to say that the same TikTok would have reached people who weren't English speaking or literate in English, would be able to participate in that conversation in the same way. And that's problematic. Right. But it's a start.
Yes, it is a start. Yeah, it is a start. And then my last question is, let's see here. What do you think that, what do we do to help children, young children and their families develop resiliency in this current social climate?
Okay, can you define current social climate? Because I just feel like we've been in current social climate forever.
Forever. Yes, I guess when I'm saying current social climate, I mean, yes, we have a long history of dealing with the issue of race. But I think from the year 2020 till and its current thing, that we are now we're being forced. I call it the time of sifting like right now we are being sifted to see what is important to us and what are we going to do about it. Um,
Mhm.
so I think this is the time, I think that, as I call it, the decision making time, time to take actions, and time for serious reflection.
Okay. Oh, okay. I got you now. Yeah.
Mhm.
So can you repeat the question, please?
So, what should we do to develop resiliency in young children and their families in this, the current social climate?
Well, I think that's a good start. What you're saying there is, I think a lot of us have spent the last 2 years really, um, you know, contemplating what's most important to us, what really matters at the end of the day. And so I just think that that should be passed on to children. Is like, what needs to be valued, what's important, and what isn't, and what are the things that you should not be. Sorry if my dogs are getting a little noisy. Quiet. What are the things that you should be putting your energy towards, or for example, I mean, I'm thinking of children can get caught up in all kinds of popular culture trends, and TikTok's a part of that. But I'm also thinking of little girls who might be concerned about their weight, or whether they're popular, or boys might be concerned about if they have muscles. I don't know, like, these are small things, right?
Hmm.
So I think it's for parents, and that depends who the parents are and what the family's values are and so on. But to really, let's say it's a family that says family is really important, and spending time with the ones you love is really important. So, we're going to make that effort to make sure that we go and see grandma, that we stay in contact with our family, that we do family things together and family activities, because I think, like, a lot of people realize, work was taking up a lot of people's time, and then all of a sudden
Hmm.
you're working from home, and then you're like, wow, why can't I have more of this family time? This is like really precious, especially when you kind of feel death is right there,
Yes.
yeah, you're like, let's make the most of it. So that's another thing. Life is short, make the most of it, make every day count. Um, for some people, it might be reconnecting with their roots. I was interviewed, I don't know, last year sometime, about that, how some people during the pandemic were reconnecting with their ethnic roots and learning about their history and how to cook the foods and do the dances and stuff. So that could be something as well, like, let's get, reconnect with our ancestry and our cultural traditions and those kinds of things. So, and I think that to me is incredibly important for resiliency. Is, again, it's knowing who you are, whatever that means to you.
Hmm.
Okay, knowing who you are, knowing who your people are, knowing where it might be a connection to land, like territory or a place. It might be a connection to something spiritual, but whatever it is, once you have that connection to something that is bigger than you and beyond the sort of superficial relationships that we tend to have, it's got to be something bigger than that, because you have to have something like that to fall back on when things get really, really crazy out there, which they have,
Yes.
they have. And it's like this, it was a real sink or swim. I say was because I kind of feel like maybe we're coming out of it. A real sink or swim time, and people had to find something to hold on to. And so that's, I would encourage children to find that. And again, that's, I think, a very personal thing. For some families, it will be spiritual. It will be like, this is where you go and you pray, and here's traditions, and maybe you want to do your own, it doesn't have to be our family tradition, connection with the divine, right? Or it could be, knowing that your family is there for you no matter what, or knowing that we come from this, ethnicity, these are our people, this is our land, and this is who we are, and having that as some kind of grounding and connection. Yeah, those kinds of things, because we live in a culture that's really superficial, and people are encouraged to identify with all kinds of stupidity. And that's not going to sustain you, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Loyalty to a sports team or to a brand of clothing or, a social media app like Instagram and, the kinds of identities that people portray on social media that are very manufactured, that's not going to sustain you. So it's got to go deeper.
Yes, I 100% agree. This has definitely been a time of testing of people's values.
Mhm. Absolutely, absolutely. And like I said, sink or swim, and I hope that people who started this, not since 2020 started without that, were able to develop it. And then those of us that had something prior to, it was just a testament, I think, to how important that is.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Hernandez Ramnar, for your time and insight. If you'd like to learn more about Camille, go to HERNANDEZRAMDWAR@gmail.com. If you have a passion for an unserved community, a social justice problem, or want to change minds, contact Project Good Work at projectgood.work to start your project of change today. To our listeners, thanks for tuning in to Project Good, where we're focused on what matters.